Jose Mourinho isn't managing a team in Europe's top 5 leagues anymore, and fans all over the world miss his brutally frank press conferences. Like the time he said that finishing second with Manchester United in the 2017-18 season was one of his best career achievements because people didn't know what went on behind the scenes at the club. During his last year at United in 2018, he gave a damning speech about football heritage and the fate of many players that had recently departed the club.
See where they play, how they play, if they play.
These words rang true years later, as all of those careers more or less went downhill, except for maybe Mkhitaryan. But his time at the club was plagued with heavy expectations and unfulfilled demands. It's no secret that United have been on a concerning downward spiral ever since Sir Alex Ferguson retired in 2013. What seemed like a rocky ship in the first few seasons after his departure has turned into a sinking one a decade later. Some big names have managed the club since, but none bigger than Mourinho. He was at the helm for his trademark length of 2.5 years. The last 6 months of his tenures are stereotypically reserved for when he loses the dressing room and comes out with some brutal truths that don't go down well within the club. But stereotypes and dramas aside, today we're going to objectively look at how successful Mourinho was compared to his predecessors and successors, and how the club was more so to blame for their decline than any other manager. It is widely believed that the downfall of United began after Sir Alex left. But if you dig deeper, the signs of rot and decay could be noticed in the last few years of his management. It was almost as if the club became complacent with the guarantee of success under their greatest manager and decided to take it for granted. Jamie Carragher once said that the only mistake Sir Alex made was underestimating just how good he was. This is true to an extent because he shouldn't have anticipated how hard it would be to replace him and still maintain the same standards. The club CEO back then was David Gill, who had been in charge for 16 years before he left at the same time as Sir Alex in 2013. He was replaced by Ed Woodward, and this proved to be another ill-timed move. There was no succession plan in place, and he handed over an aging squad to David Moyes. He was an absolute disaster from the start, and after him, Van Gaal spent big money but had nothing to show for it in terms of league finishes. He won the FA Cup in May 2016, 2 days after which he was replaced by the special one. Mourinho came with a ruthless reputation for winning, and waves of optimism washed over United supporters when Jose was announced in the summer of 2016. But there were a fair number of supporters who felt it was a misfit, and some who used to look down upon his Chelsea tactics for being a bit too cautious. However, the failures of the previous two managers had pushed the club towards opting for a tried and tested personality. They needed a serial winner. The first season under Mourinho brought 2 trophies and a community shield to Old Trafford, along with some murmurs of pragmatic football. Winning the Europa League and unleashing Paul Pogba were seen as major achievements in his debut campaign. Mourinho claimed that he had to overcome huge challenges to achieve what he did and used pragmatism to beat his opponents. But he had 17 wins and 15 draws in the league. The number of draws hinted towards the team's lack of conviction in closing out wins. Astonishing pressure came in the form of how underperforming in any metric had the potential to create headlines that read, "For the first time in Premier League history." This sentence sensationalized the news, but what people failed to grasp was that Sir Alex had been in charge since the Premier League began in 1992. This kept any manager that came after Ferguson under great scrutiny for creating new lows in the Premier League era. A prime example of this is when Mourinho's United sat in 6th place in November 2016 with only 20 points from their first 13 games. It marked the Red Devils' worst start in the Premier League era, though it was just shy of Moyes' and Van Gaal's lowest first season tallies of 22 points. Hardly sensational enough for dramatic headlines. The summer window in 2017 brought 3 reinforcements in the form of Lukaku, Lindelof and Matic. The start of 2017-18 came with an improvement in attacking numbers, and by December, the board was ready to give him a new contract. The club hierarchy publicly backed the manager, saying he was the right choice for the long term. But Mourinho had started to look perpetually annoyed on the touchline and carried a tired demeanour to press conferences instead of his usual chirpy one. It was almost as if he was appointed to be the manager of the club, but only allowed to act as a head coach. Regardless, he signed a new contract in January 2018. Perhaps it was this new contract that made Mourinho feel even more secure in his role as he laid out a frank approach with his squad. The infamous Sanchez and Mkhitaryan swap deal also happened at the start of 2018. United lost 2-0 to Spurs in February 2018. Pogba was taken off at the hour mark and then dropped for the next game against Huddersfield. He was taken off after an hour again in the next match against Newcastle, which they lost 1-0. The next fixture was the Champions League round of 16 against Sevilla. Pogba was benched in the first leg and only brought on within 17 minutes because of an injury to Herrera. It was a goalless draw. The second leg saw the French midfielder on the bench once again, getting only 30 minutes. They were knocked out after a 2-1 loss. These constant benchings raised eyebrows about the star player and the manager's relationship. But another overlooked aspect of Mourinho's management style is his tough love dynamics and mentally pushing players to do better, which was ironically very similar to Alex Ferguson's no-nonsense approach. But another factor working against Mourinho was the sudden uptick of social media, which made it easier to paint villains and misconstrue facts. The 3-2 comeback against City in April 2018 came courtesy of a Pogba brace. It saved the Old Trafford fans from watching their rivals lift the title that day and gave a boost to their top four charge. The season finished with United in second place and a berth booked for Wembley to play the FA Cup final against Chelsea. In hindsight, many have observed this to be an overachievement by the team, but considering the heavy investment and how other top teams were either under a rebuild or going through whatever Arsenal went through, it sounds like they achieved just fine. But Mourinho was far from pleased with some of the players and called Rashford out among some of his other attacking options. He also said that the squad didn't have as much individual quality as everyone thought. He directly called out the players who weren't getting regular minutes, like Martial and Luke Shaw, for being unreliable and inconsistent. In the summer of 2018, Pogba went to Russia and lifted the World Cup with France. The midfielder put on a fantastic display throughout the tournament. Mourinho said it was the perfect tournament for the player because he was completely isolated from distractions and focused on football. The third season under the Portuguese manager was about to begin and fans were already talking about a toxic locker room. It wasn't a secret anymore that Mourinho hadn't been given all the players he had asked for in the past. He had differences with the scouting department as well. He was once amused that the scouts hadn't identified how good Maguire was at Hull and only recommended him after his value shot up dramatically with Leicester. The summer window saw Fred and Dalot come in while the manager claimed he had a longer list which wasn't allowed. Mourinho kept hinting at the dire need for a centre-back to be brought in, but the club didn't budge. Another transfer window passed and Mourinho wasn't provided with his pick of tools. He became visibly tired of repeating the same issues with the club hierarchy. It was clear that the pressure was on him after losing 3-0 to Spurs at home. This was also Mourinho's biggest home loss to date. The press conference the very next day became one of the most iconic ones when he demanded respect and counted his Premier League titles against all other 19 managers combined.
Respect, man.
September came with a fresh rift with Pogba, which was clearly brewing behind the scenes. The players said they should attack more at Old Trafford, and he couldn't say why they weren't. This was a crystal clear dig at Mourinho's pragmatism. Vice-captaincy was stripped away from him and was followed by a public scuffle between the two during training. Another season with the worst start in decades for United stole the headlines as the manager kept complaining about the mentality of the players. In October, the league match against Newcastle was anticipated to be a reckoning day for Mourinho. After going 2-0 down with 10 minutes, a 3-2 comeback delays the axe, but it finally comes in December after a loss to Liverpool and very close to the third anniversary of his Chelsea sacking. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Ten Hag have tried to establish an identity at the club since then, but with each passing season, Mourinho's Europa League victory and second place finish only look more impressive. More importantly, some of his brutal truths about the club have proven to be true over time. Since then, Mourinho has managed Spurs and Roma and is currently in Turkey at Fenerbahce. His time at Manchester United was underappreciated. Do you think United would be in a better place today had they stuck with Mourinho for the hard times? Let us know in the comments below.